Oklahoma Gardening is a production of the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the land grant mission of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University, dedicated to improving the quality of life of the citizens of Oklahoma through research-based information. Underwriting assistance is provided by TLC, Oklahoma's leading garden center, Southwood Landscape and Garden Center, Tulsa's source for great gardens, southwoodgardencenter.com. and the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping to keep Oklahoma green and growing. Welcome to Oklahoma Gardening. On today's program, host Casey Hentges has tips on evaluating and cleaning up storm-damaged trees. We cut back, divide, and replant ornamental grasses in the garden. Casey makes some beautiful indoor arrangements by forcing spring-flowering shrubs. And Barbara Brown prepares a sweet and spicy pepper salad.
This winter we've endured a few ice storms, and while we're not out of the woods yet, we need to start looking at some of those trees that didn't fare so well this winter during those ice storms. When you're looking at a tree and determining whether you want to remove it or not, I'd like to say there's an easy way to determine that. Unfortunately, it can kind of be subjective based on whether you have some sentimental value with that tree. Now, there are a couple of factors you should consider, and the first being you want to look at your tree and see if there's any hazardous branches that could potentially fall down in the future, or if the tree itself has lost the integrity to be sound. The next thing you want to think about and look at is the shape of the canopy of the tree. If the canopy of the tree has lost over a third of it, you might consider removing that tree. The third thing to consider is how easy it is to replace that tree. Is it a fast-growing tree, and is it readily available in nurseries? Or maybe you really weren't that much of a fan of that tree and you want to consider getting something different. The fourth thing that you want to think about and look at is how much damage is done to the main trunk of the tree. If you look behind us, this tree has lost one of its leaders and has incurred significant damage to the trunk of the tree. Now, after you decide you want to remove a tree, you want to be honest with yourself and decide whether you can do it yourself or you need to hire somebody. When you hire an arborist, you want to make sure that they are ISA certified, and that stands for the International Society of Arboriculture, meaning you will know that your arborist that you're hiring will be doing the proper pruning procedures and also remove it safely. The other thing you want to make sure to ask your contractor is if they have insurance for any liability that might incur on your property. Here we have a tree that has a little less significant ice damage. So we've determined that this tree needs to be removed,
but we have lost a branch,
professionals
and you can
to
see
do
that
that.
branch ripped and created a fair amount of damage done to that branch right here.
We're going to want to remove this branch just because anytime you have exposed surface area that's been ripped like that, it invites pathogens and potential decay into this tree. So we're going to make this a clean cut using the 3-cut method. And the way you want to do that, first of all, we're going to identify where the branch collar is. You can see it's the swollen area where the branch meets the trunk of the tree, and you don't want to cut into these cells. These are the cells that will actively grow and callus over once we remove this branch. What we're going to do is cut 3 different cuts on this branch to remove it properly. The first cut we're going to make is an undercut, and we're going to do this a couple of inches outside of this branch collar. So we're going to do this first. The next cut that we're going to make is outside on the top. We'll draw a line there so that you can see. And this is going to be our second cut. And we're going to cut all the way through the branch here.
Now, the reason why we're doing this is because if we just made a cut through the branch, what would happen is the tissue on the bottom would tend to rip down into the trunk of the tree. And this again is what we want to prevent. So by making this first undercut, that tissue will only rip back to this cut here. Now the final cut that we're going to make is to clean off this here, and we will do that just outside of that branch collar. And again, we don't want to cut into those cells that are actively growing, because those are what's going to callus over and create a nice sealed wound. So if you're worried about making an improper cut, using this marker to write on here first is a great way to kind of see what you're going to do before you cut. Now again, we're just going to follow the numbers. So we're going to make our first cut here. Safety first is always important. And the other thing is you want to make sure you have a nice sharp saw. So what we're going to do is just cut the undercut where that number 1 is. So now that we have the undercut done, and you don't have to saw all the way through on number 1. This is simply again to prevent that tissue from tearing down into the trunk of the tree. So now we'll move on to number 2, and we're going to cut this all the way through. Again, this is so we take the weight of the branch off of. So while this branch didn't rip all the way back to our cut, you can see how it did start to pull back, and that cut would prevent that bark from going all the way into the trunk of the tree. Now that we have the weight of the branch removed, we're going to make our final cut, and that's because we want to get this stub off of here. If we were to leave this, eventually this would start to decay and again create a spot for insects and pathogens to come into this tree. So we're going to finish with our third cut. And again, you don't want to cut into the branch collar, you want to cut just outside of that. Now we've successfully removed the branch off of this tree, and you can see that it's not flush. A lot of times people think you need to cut a branch flush with the trunk of the tree, and that's not always the case, because again, we want to make sure that we're cutting outside of that swollen branch collar. Again, these are the cells that are going to callus over this and heal this wound. Everyone loves low maintenance plants, and while every plant requires some amount of care, ornamental grasses are probably one of the low maintenance plants you can have in the garden. Now, they do require a little bit of attention in the late winter, early spring, and that's because they've got all of this dried material on top. Now, we like this during the winter time because, one, it provides protection to the crown of the plant, but also we enjoy seeing the texture as winter interest. We do need to cut this back now though, allowing for that new growth to come on. And so in order to do that, we're going to cut it about 3 or 4 inches above the crown of the plant. So what we're going to use, you can either use shears, or you can use something electrical or gas. We always want to make sure that we've got our safety equipment on, so we've got our glasses and also our gloves to do this. Now this works, shears work great if you're doing just 1 or 2 plants, but if you have a lot of them like we do here at the gardens, you might want to opt for something with a little more power. Now you can see we've tied ours up, and this makes it easy for collecting it and taking it to the compost. we're actually going to take ours and give it to the chickens. It also makes it nice when you tie it up so that when there's wind, it kind of contains it a little bit. It picks it up out of the way so you can see where you're cutting, and you don't have to go chasing it down with the rake. After we've cut away the old foliage, what we're going to do next is take a look at the crown of the plant. And you can see that this switchgrass, it's a clump forming grass. And so what tends to happen on these is the center dies out. You can see here that there's really no active growing tissue here in the center. So what we're going to want to do is divide this. Now this is a large grass clump to divide, so we're probably not going to be able to dig up the whole thing. We're just going to dig up sections of it, and those will act like individual divisions that we can then take and replant somewhere else. Now before you start digging, you always want to make sure that you're aware of any irrigation that's around. So we want to make sure that we find those lines, and there's one going right through this grass here, and that we don't cut those. When you dig, a sharp spade is always nice to use, and you want to make sure to go deep enough that you're getting a good amount of that root ball. You can see here that we had a large clump of grass that we were working with, and instead of digging up the whole root ball, which would have been too hard to handle, we've actually just dug a section of it up. You want to just get in there and be aggressive about cutting through that root ball because it's got quite a bit of roots. Now what we're going to do, we could take this and plant it, and it would be another plant somewhere else, or we can actually cut it in half and have 2 more plants. If you were to dig up an ornamental grass, the whole root ball being this size, you could take it and quarter it or half it, depending on how many more plants you would want, but you have plenty of crown here to get a couple of more plants out of this. We have here another clump forming grass. This is a miscanthus, and it hasn't been divided in quite a while, so you can see that once again there's a center that has died out on it. Now if you're tired of breaking your shovels trying to dig these root balls up and divide these grasses, you might be interested in our next little experiment that we're going to do. Now we've heard that you can actually take an auger and drill out the center of this grass and then put fresh soil in there. And what that does is that digs out some of the old roots, and it gets some of the old soil out, puts fresh soil in there, and it allows that grass to grow back into the center. So we're going to try this and take a look at it in a year and see if the grass has started growing back to the center. If you're like me, this time of year it gets pretty lifeless feeling and drab. There's no color in the garden anymore, and we're looking for any sort of color that we can add to the garden. And just as gardeners, we're getting excited about those plant catalogs coming in and seeing the color again and starting to daydream. Well, if you're feeling the winter blues like me, we might have a project for you that you might be interested in to bring some of that spring to life a little bit early. Today we're going to force some spring blooming shrub branches and bring those into our house to provide a little color. So what we have here is a forsythia. Now typically you wouldn't want to prune this this time of year, because what you're going to be doing is cutting off any of those flowering blooms. So we are going to take a few branches off of this shrub, but we're going to get to enjoy those flowers indoors. Now when you are cutting spring blooming shrubs, you can see that they already have the buds developed. They developed these in the year previous, and so like I said, if you're cutting these off, you're cutting the flowers also. Now these buds, even though they've developed in the fall, they need 8 weeks below 40 degrees to feel like they've gone through that winter chilling period. We're past that, so now we can go ahead and harvest these and trick them into blooming. And what we're going to want to do is cut branches that are about 8 to 16 inches long. Again, anytime you're pruning a shrub, you want to make sure that you're pruning it correctly. So we don't want to harvest all of the branches from one side of the plant. We kind of want to look at the whole plant and take those branches down as low as possible. So this branch here is a little bit old and probably needs to come off anyway, so we're going to go ahead and prune this one out. Typically the best time to prune spring blooming shrubs is after they bloom and before these new buds begin to develop for the next year. However, since we are taking some of these branches, it's always important to think about how to prune properly. And one of the things that you want to look at is if there's any disease, and remove those branches first. The next thing is if there's any rubbing branches or crossing branches. You can see here that this branch is crossing the larger branch behind it here, and it's actually rubbing on that. So we want to go ahead and remove this branch here. And we can use that in our display. We're going to take a couple more in here. Again, make sure you get those branches down low in the plant. And like this one here, you can see that this has a big Y to it. Now we've cut this branch, but we can actually cut it here later on and use this branch in the floral arrangement too. So just because it doesn't look like something you're going to use right away, we can make this work. So we're pruning on a forsythia here, but there's a lot of other spring blooming shrubs that you can also prune on, such as flowering quince, bridal wreath spirea, and mock orange. Now that we've harvested our branches off of the shrubs, we're going to bring these back and we're going to recut them. We want to make sure that we cut at an angle. This allows for more water to be taken up by the branch, and you want to do it a couple of inches above your previous cut. So we'll put those, once we cut all of these, we'll put these back in some warm water, and we want to put these in a cool, partly shady area in our home, and that just allows these to kind of gradually warm up. So you can see that it's a nice winter day today, but had we harvested these branches when it was freezing, then you want to actually submerge the whole branch underwater. And you can do this in a bathtub overnight, and that allows the temperature to slowly rise in the branches. And this will transition those buds and allow them to break a little bit easier. Now, if you have a floral preservative, you want to add that. That will help the life of these branches. But if you don't, we're going to show you how to make one. We have a quart of water here, and to that you're going to add 2 tablespoons of sugar, just plain cooking sugar. You're also going to add 2 tablespoons of white vinegar, and then a half of teaspoon, so just a little bit of bleach is what we're going to add. Not much at all. And what this does, the bleach and the sugar, it prevents any algae or bacteria from growing in the water, and the sugar actually provides food and carbohydrates to those branches so they keep growing. We're just going to stir this up, and we're going to add this. After we've added our floral preservative, we're just going to put these in a cool, semi-shady location in our house as the temperatures start to affect these buds. And we want to monitor them pretty frequently to monitor the water level so that they don't dry out, and also check to see if there's any color on the buds as they break. As soon as we start to see there's color, then that's when we can take them and start arranging them. Over here we have some branches that we harvested from the shrubs a couple of weeks ago, and you can see they've really come into some flowers. So we're going to take these and arrange them now, and this is not complicated at all. You don't have to be really skilled when you're doing this. You just need a couple of containers. This is the cheapest container you can get if you've enjoyed a glass of wine. And here is just another glass container. The nice thing about both of these is that they're tall and they're heavy, and they also have very narrow necks. So again, that will hold those branches because they tend to be heavy, and it'll keep them from falling over. So we're going to take our forsythia. I always like the yellow forsythia with the blue bottles. We have some thinner branches here, which is nice. On this other vase, we're going to use the quince. We're using this larger mouth vase for this because the quince tends to have a larger branch to it sometimes, a little bit irregular shape. It's not always straight. If you have any of these lower branches, now's a good time to go ahead and cut those off so that they can fit easily in here. And there's nothing to this. The nice thing about, again, having a tall narrow neck is that holds those branches upright. Simply just going to arrange these so that you have some color around the entire display. Again, pruning off anything that might be sticking in its way. The nice thing is these will continue to bloom up the stem as they get exposed to more temperatures, higher temperatures. And you'll just put these in a nice location that is not in direct sun. Again, you don't want to expose them to too much direct sun, but you can bring them into a little bit more light than they were when they were being stored. And we'll put water in here and again some more floral preservative, and you'll have a nice display to carry you through those last few days of winter.
Today we're doing sweet and spicy pepper salad, and this is a variety of peppers, and it does take a little bit of time to get going, but trust me, it's going to be worth it, and it's something you can definitely do ahead. In fact, I encourage you to do it about 4 hours before you're ready to serve it, so if you've got family coming in, you've got time to still be with the crowd. So we're going to start with the dressing, and I'm going to use the juice from one orange, or if you don't have an orange to juice, but you have orange juice in the refrigerator, it's going to be about half a cup. If you juice it yourself, I encourage you to go ahead and put the pulp in here too. It's in the blender. If you don't like pulp, it's pretty much going to disappear anyhow. And then I've got 2 cloves of garlic that have been minced up. Put those in there. And then a tablespoon of vegetable oil. And you can use whatever kind you've got handy or whichever kind you like. Probably not something that's excessively flavorful, but there's a lot of flavor going on here, so it's probably going to mask anything that would be a stronger one anyway. So this is going to get blended until, or pureed until it's really smooth. Okay, once you get that well blended, well purified to your desire, you probably don't want to have big chunks of garlic in there, but once it's pureed well, set it aside. We're going to get it again in just a minute. All right, get out a nice big bowl, or at least for me it's a big bowl for stirring purposes. And to the bowl I'm going to add 1 jalapeno that I have chopped up fairly finely. Now I seeded it and took the membranes out. I do wear gloves when I work with jalapeno just because I seem to have hands that burn more than some other people do apparently. And if you wanted a stronger pepper in this, you could definitely go with something stronger. If you don't like the heat at all, you could cut back on the amount of jalapeno that you added. I'm also going to add to this 1 mango that's been cut up, seeded and large dice. And then I've got 3 additional peppers. So as I said, this has a lot of pepper in it. There are 4, and they're all different colors, which add so much interest to the dish that people are going to want to try it that maybe don't usually like peppers. So 1 large red bell pepper, seeded and sliced the long way. The same with a green bell pepper, and the same with a yellow. Now, if you only had 1 color of pepper, say all you had was orange. Well, working for OSU, I'm not going to object to that, but this adds a lot more drama when you get the different colors going in there, pulls in a lot more interest, and if you had only had red, you could do that too. Now I'm going to use an apple. This is only half an apple, and I've taken the core out of it and again just sliced it the long way. You could slice this in half again if you wanted to so that they'd be more bite-sized, but the peppers are already so long that people are going to be dealing with that issue when it gets to eating it. So I wouldn't worry about that quite as much. And then I have about 1/3 of a cup of fairly finely chopped cilantro, about 1/4 of a teaspoon of black pepper, and 1/2 teaspoon of kosher salt. And put that in. And if you wanted to, if you're concerned about the salt content, or you just want to make sure that it's not too salty or whatnot, you can go ahead and mix it together and then come back and taste it and see if you need more. You can't ever take it out. That's why that's a good plan. All right, dressing is going over it, and then it's simply a matter of tossing it together so that everything gets coated. Now we do this, in part becomes a marinated salad because it's going to taste better if you can let it sit for about 4 hours. Now keep in mind that when you're marinating things that have a lot of green color in them, chlorophyll in particular, since that's the green color, if you leave it too long in acid, which the orange juice is, it's going to start to turn sort of that olive drab army color. which is great on a soldier but not so good in a salad. So seal this tightly, put it in the refrigerator. You could put it in a smaller container and seal it well. Let it sit for about 4 hours, and then when you're done, you get this terrific salad with so much color, so much flavor, that I think it's going to be a real delight to your family and those you share it with. I hope you'll give it a try. It's sweet and spicy pepper salad. For Oklahoma Gardening, I'm Barbara Brown.
Next week, we're going to be back with a whole new season of Oklahoma Gardening. It's been a cold, dry winter, and we're going to take a look at some plants that might not be doing so well and some that are doing pretty well in this cold weather. We're also going to take a look at how to take care of some weeds in our lawn. Join us next week as we begin a whole new season of Oklahoma Gardening.
There are lots of great horticultural events this time of year. Be sure and consider these activities when you're making your plans for the weeks ahead. To find out more information about show topics, as well as recipes, videos, articles, fact sheets, and other resources, including a directory of local extension offices, be sure and visit our website, oklahomagardening.okstate.edu. We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. You can also find even more videos on our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.